In this video, I will be laying out the foundation, purpose, intention, focus, and goal of this YouTube channel, The Urban Scout. I will focus primarily on urban survival and urban preparedness. The subject of survival covers a variety of areas. Many of them overlap. Some of them are distinct unto themselves. The most well-known, wilderness survival. Then most recently in the past 20 years, the idea of disaster preparedness, emergency preparedness has become more common to the average American. I believe the newfound interest in preparedness and survivalism took hold during the late 1990s, right before the Y2K bug was predicted to collapse the entire United States and the entire world. For those of you who don't know, the Y2K bug was a theory set forth by computer scientists and politicians and some world leaders that when the year 2000 came in, computers would not be able to recognize it as just another year. Since computers were programmed to register the last two numbers, when we moved from 1999 to the year 2000, the computers would turn to 00, and that would be computer language instructions for all infrastructure, all systems to start over again, to reboot from zero. And it was widely believed that it would shut down all of our operating systems, including the electrical grid, navigation, GPS. Some people predicted that satellites would be falling out of the sky because they wouldn't be able to navigate. Now, as we now know, none of that happened. And there was little to no damage done, no disruption in service anywhere in the United States. We can now look back at hindsight and realize nothing happened. But during the late 90s, especially from 96 till 99, this was widely publicized. This was the first example that I had ever seen in my lifetime of people seriously and sincerely preparing for a disaster, global disaster. Of course, for the gun enthusiasts, it was all about guns and bullets because there was going to be chaos and madness. For other people, it was food and water. For others, it was energy, gasoline, propane, kerosene, and for some, there was a combination of all. There was a dramatic increase in the purchase of any goods, supplies, and equipment that had to do with preparing for the Y2K bug. Billions were spent getting ready for this. When nothing happened, those who had prepared were looked at as fools and lunatics. For others, like myself, it set the seeds in my mind of what would have happened if the predictions were true. And living in New York City, what would life look like if the entire electrical grid went down and there was no water and there was no food being shipped in? That incident planted the seeds in my mind that anything is possible. For me, the Y2K bug was a warning that the infrastructure is controlled and maintained by people, machines, equipment, computers, electronics, circuits, and systems. And if any part of that intricate system goes down, the ability to sustain life is in jeopardy. So much later on in life, when I started my formal survival training, the first type of training I embarked on was wilderness survival training, particularly primitive skills, meaning you get everything you need to sustain life from the wilderness itself. You have no modern amenities, no modern tools, no electronic equipment, etc. And the first thing they taught us was to set a priority of needs hierarchy. To illustrate this, we just go back to my name, the Urban Scout. We start with the word urban, defined by Webster's dictionary as relating to, characteristics of, or constituting a city. And then the word scout, meaning to explore an area or obtain information as about an enemy. Also, to observe or evaluate, to explore in order to obtain information. When you're in the discipline of survival, especially in an urban area, your primary job is to gather information so that you can prepare for what may come. There is an abundance of information regarding wilderness survival. And since that particular area of social media has become so clogged with a variety of characters from the military to hunters to campers. But after the Y2K bug scare, there started to appear a growing number of people in urban areas, city areas, that took an interest in the subject. When I look online at the content, the overwhelming majority of people who are touting urban survival are actually living in the suburbs. They have backyards, they have garages, they have solar panels, they have cisterns to collect rainwater. It's clear that these are suburban people who may live near a city, but they do not live in a city. In cities like New York or Chicago, you most likely live in an apartment, a condo, or a co-op. Your car is parked on the street, your water and your electricity comes from a utility company, and your food comes from the supermarket. This is urban living. And with that specific type of living, you have to have specific strategies and philosophies to go with that. Now, if you look at the Urban Scout insignia, at the top you will see a city, which is the urban center, the tall buildings which constitute the city. Underneath, you will see 4 symbols that represent the hierarchy of needs. The hierarchy of needs are the things that you must prioritize in any situation, from most important to least important, to ensure your survival. Shelter, water, fire, food. This was the first hierarchy of needs system I learned when I started learning wilderness survival, and I thought it was only fitting to make them a permanent part of my insignia. Now, depending on what your particular survival situation is, these priority of needs may change. Currently, there is a widely accepted rule of thumb in the survival community called the rule of 3s, and it states that you can only survive 3 minutes without air, 3 hours without shelter, 3 days without water, and 3 weeks without food. I believe that general rule is extremely general and inaccurate. In an extremely cold situation, without proper protection, you could die in a few hours. In an extremely hot situation, like a desert, you could also die in a few hours. If you are in a wilderness survival situation because of your exposure to the elements, the need to build a shelter to protect yourself from cold, rain, insects, and animals is primary. But in an urban survival situation, the nature of the urban environment is full of freestanding structures, buildings, commercial and residential, subway tunnels, highway underpasses, and even automobiles. Water is always going to be a primary concern because without it, your body system starts shutting down very quickly from dehydration. Fire is absolutely mandatory in a wilderness environment to regulate body temperature as a light source at night, to disinfect water, cook food, make tools, and ward off predators. In an urban environment, the priority of fire diminishes and would be replaced by electricity as a means to regulate temperature, the light source, to cook food, and disinfect water. In an urban setting, you can easily go without fire. Very difficult to go without electricity. And finally, food in either a wilderness or urban environment. Food holds the same position, no matter what the circumstances. It's last. The human body can go a very long time without food or very little of it. After these 4 elements have been obtained, there are additional categories that become necessary depending on the situation. Security, medical, sanitation, transportation, communication. These areas are very specific. These areas are very different for the different types of disaster situations and scenarios. Over the years, the number one question that I get from the people that I train, and the vast majority of those people are executives and professionals living in major American cities, most of whom come from a corporate background, highly educated. Their biggest concern is that they do not have any formal military or law enforcement experience. At the very least, they don't come from a background of outdoorsmanship, camping, hiking, hunting, and fishing. They mistakenly believe that these skills are necessary to be successful in preparing for and surviving an urban emergency. I have to make it clear to them that the things we do in an urban environment are not the things we do in a wilderness, military, or law enforcement environment. Even though some of that training may be helpful and transferable, in the bigger picture, that type of experience is not necessary. Their biggest assets are their knowledge of the city, their willingness to prepare, and the ability to act quickly when things go wrong. Whenever clients come to me with this concern, I always enjoy referring them to a scene from the classic sci-fi film Aliens, starring Sigourney Weaver and Bill Paxton. In the film, an elite group of space marines is sent to check on a colony that has lost contact with Earth. Upon arrival, they discover that the entire colony has been wiped out by a predatory species of aliens, except for one survivor, a little girl named Newt. She was able to survive by being small, silent, and fast. She scavenged supplies from the living quarters of the other colonists. She moved during the day when the aliens were least active, and most of all, she remained silent. This was an excellent reminder that the will to survive in any situation starts in the mind.
How long after we're declared overdue can we expect a rescue?
17 days.
17 days? Hey, man, I don't want to rain on your parade, but we're not going to last 17 hours. Those things are going to come in here just like they did before, and they're going to come in here, and they're going to come in here, and they're going to get us.
This little girl survived longer than that with no weapons and no training. Right?